He stood alone upon this prime, amidst the devastation. He had met another of him, or at least near enough to be of him, and it had been a glorious sight. But he had also learned an important fact. It feared his power, and somehow he had perverted the powers of the divine in the blast he had unleashed, and this intrigued him. This should not be so, but as he examined his threads, he noticed something strange. His daemonic part, his true self, had changed, albeit in a small manner. It had been infused with the prime, a large amount of such raw power, and he had never felt it before. The prime was not of demonic origins, but formed of the hosts themselves, with infusion and imparting from other planes of existence. Could it be that in the act of infusing himself with this power, and his unique origins as they were, that he had somehow birthed a new magic, a new power? It was something that equalled the host's own, but with far darker origins, and he would come to realize this power in time, as he flexed his newfound prowess and began to leech more of this prime into his form. He spent many years absorbing this prime, and several times small rifts began to open from other daemons wishing to join in the feast, but as they appeared, he sucked the rifts dry, blocking their access, preventing them from taking what was his. This power would be his and his alone, and it would grant him a reservoir of raw energy with which to make his goals a reality. Once he had drained the entire prime and taken it into himself, the host's shell, his very divine essence, cracked and split like some gigantic insect carapace. His true form grew to contain this new level of power, and as it solidified, the power of his divinity settled into its new host. This was how the other daemon had become so large, and as he flexed his new form, he realized it was so much more powerful than before, in both demonic force as his threads grew and multiplied from the magic he had taken as he had sucked the prime dry, and divine power gleaned from the very prime itself as it was broken down and absorbed into his shell. It was then, after this span of time, that he turned his attention back to the prime from which he had traversed, to the place of the scaled ones. He found that he did not need to ask them to open a rift, as his new levels of magic allowed him to effortlessly create a pathway, his threads chasing to his destination and fording a channel through the flows of the plains between. As he arrived in the realm, he did not recognize it at first. It was barren instead of lush, and the mountains were bare and ashen, the sky a dreary tone of grey, and not a tree could be seen where there should be vast forests. Am I in the right place? His thoughts slowed as he tried to make sense of the view, but it was as he allowed his threads to explore that he realized what had happened, and rage began to build within him. His threads had touched a scaled one, or rather what was left of it, torn asunder, ripped apart by magics he had not known until this encounter on the other prime. The daemon who called him brethren had been here, and he had done this. Whether to anger or remove aid, he did not know, nor care, as for the first time he felt loss, true loss. These creatures had been his only friends, if he could call them that. They had treated him with kindness despite his heritage, his form. They had taken him in and nurtured his understanding of the planes, of the realms, had taught him about the primes and histories, and helped him unlock the secrets of some of his power. This brethren would pay, and pay with his very essence. He would strip it, remove every thread from the planes, destroy every vestige of his power, from the very primes themselves. This daemon would know pain, fear and terror before he was removed from existence. This was his first true anger, his taste of unbound rage, and it fueled his lust for power for millennia to come. He spent the next time, of which was a great span, searching the demonic planes for answers, for the true home of this daemon, but none knew of it. Those who refused to answer became one with his threats, and then he learned their truths, growing as he did. Those who aided him became his envoys, but in time his magics corrupted their threats and turned them to his own side. It seemed as his power grew, his corrupting influence began to seep from his form without great concentration on his part, as though his demonic side was vying for control, for power, for the opportunity to spread like a plague across the threads of magic and reality that it encountered. He began to be known as the Scourge for a time by his own kin, as everything he touched eventually turned, decayed, and became one with him. With this realization, the daemons pulled back from contact with him, as eventually just the mere meeting with him was enough for a thread to become tainted, and if not cut out, would spread throughout their forms, their lands, and their vassals. But in all his travels and all his conquests, he could find no trace of this brethren, nor could he find anyone who could point him in the direction of those that the Scaled Ones had tried to contact on his behalf. And then something unexpected occurred. A message for him, written in the very threads themselves, guiding him to a meeting place. By now his place of origin was a beacon of power within the vastness of the planar landscape, and although they could sense it, and some could even see it, none would dare venture close, as the taint of his threads permeated all who touched, and none would do so willingly. However, those of the Prime knew nothing of this, as they could not see or sense from where they sat. This power grew unknown to their kinds, hidden from the host. He wanted this. In fact, he needed it, in order to return and dethrone them, take their power, and finish what he had begun. But this message puzzled him. It was from within the planes themselves, deeper than he knew or had seen, as though the very essence of magic itself was leading him somewhere. And so he ventured and journeyed deeper into the demonic realms than any of his kind had ventured in aeons. This place was so deep and thick with magic, permeating evil beyond measure, and here, despite his body being of the host, and immensely more powerful than it had been when he first ventured out, he could feel it slowly eroding his form. He had not known this place existed, and he had seen all of existence, all of the planes, all that the host could see. Of course, this was beyond their sight, in the same ways their own plane was beyond the sight and reach of daemon kind. In fact, he doubted they even knew of this place, as he slowly pushed his way through the thick threads that tried to crush and hold him, to prevent his movement onward. Here the threads were so tightly packed that they were like cloth was to stone. Threads moved at his command, or were brushed aside by his touch under normal conditions, and even the deepest planes he had been to had been little more than pushing his way through what would equate to water at most to those of the living kind. But this was like pushing a way through a thick liquid, perhaps somehow walking through sand up to his torso, or swimming through tar. Perhaps other ways to explain it could be found, but his experience of reality had been sparse. But none other than he had been here. At least none from the Primes, he would wager. How wrong he was. As he forged further, deeper, the threads became like stone, unmoving, unrelenting in their pressure to prevent his movement, and he paused for a moment to gather his power, to try to force the threads to move to his will. But he noticed something else. His threads could not pierce the threads here. they were unable to coerce them to his will, and try as he might, he could not see the nature of these threads, as they refused to bend to his will, and the deeper he moved, the weaker he found himself becoming, as the host-given shell grew weaker. Then, without warning, the threads parted, and he fell for a great distance, through a space almost devoid of thread, where he could only sense the hint of such circling at distance from him. And he knew he had pushed past this barrier, but into what? Now, that was the question.